Where are you right now?
Right now, I'm in Kent, in the UK.
Tell me about Kent, because my UK geography, I have like a vague grasp. I'm not the worst, but I'm definitely not the best.
So Kent borders on London, so I'm not like really that far out of London, but it's on the coast. It's kind of like, I guess, the nearest part of the country to France. But I'm in a seaside town right now called Whitstable.
Okay, and that's where you grew up, right?
I grew up in London.
Okay.
And then I relocated to Whitstable when I was a teenager. So I don't actually live, I'm actually at my parents' house at the moment. I'm just visiting. So at the moment, I live over near Bristol. I don't know if you've heard of Bristol.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like a big music city here in the UK.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I've been to London, I've been to Brighton, a couple other towns. Like I've been to the UK a bit, and obviously the musical history from all the different towns I know a fair amount about. But I'm always just curious for people who are there. I mean, was it weird for you growing up in London and then in your teen years moving to what I assume is a much smaller, quieter place? Kind of in those years when probably that wasn't necessarily what you wanted as a teen?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of protested the move for quite a long time before it happened. And when we moved here as a family, it was super different. This was probably around like the late 2000s. So, I mean, the internet and social media was definitely not like big yet. So kind of, you know, at that time where you lived, like, was kind of what you could see right. compared to now. So there was like a serious like lack of culture at the time in Kent where I was living compared to London, which yeah, like you say, as a teenager, I kind of spent most of my time getting on the train back to London.
Yeah, that sounds about. I mean, what is it, like an hour, couple hours to London?
It's like an hour, yeah,
okay. Yeah, yeah. Well, what were you missing? Like, what kind of culture were you into at the time that then you move away and you have less of it?
I mean, I wasn't really old enough to fully be like adulting at that point. So it wasn't necessarily at that time, you know, like going to clubs or going out with my friends on my own so much. I think it was just like the sights, the smells, the sounds in London, just like there was a much more mixed culture in terms of like just the people. It was just very like in Kent, it was very like everyone was sort of a clone of each other.
Yeah.
You know, there wasn't any different cultures or foods or anything like that. So I think I probably wouldn't have put my finger on it like that at the time, but it was just a feeling at the time, you know.
Mm. And I mean, what kind of a kid or what kind of a teenager were you? You know, how would you describe yourself at that time? I
mean, I think now I'm older and wiser. I probably feel a little bit sorry for my parents in having to. I've always been like super independent from a really young age and very, very determined. So I was kind of like just a bit of free spirit. So, you know, like I said, I was jumping on the train to London, sometimes not telling them. So I was kind of just following the vibe at all times. And I think, I never got into any serious trouble, but I definitely wasn't just kind of like stay at home and get home on time kind of situation.
Yeah, no, the parents don't like it so much when you don't tell them you're going to London.
And then just like don't come back for 3 days.
Oh yeah, they really don't like that. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure on that time I did actually manage to get into fabric.
Oh, okay.
I started going out to raves like way before, you know, I was legally of an age. But I think back then it was a little bit easier than it is now. I think now for like younger people, like you absolutely can't get into a club without like your legitimate ID. But going back, you know, sort of around 10 years ago, like we were still on the cusp of like using someone else's, and it was a little, or sometimes like they wouldn't even ID you at clubs.
Right.
So I definitely started as soon as I could going in and listening to dance music in clubs. Like I was doing it.
Yeah, well, so that makes me want to ask, how did you, because, I'm out here in America, and I think America and the UK, it's interesting because we have sort of this cultural exchange for dance music that, dates back to the start of dance music. But I think the experience growing up in the UK, there's sort of this innate dance music sense or understanding that I don't think a lot of Americans have. Well, let me just ask you, growing up, like, was dance music around? Did it feel like, like something you had to go and find and seek out? Or was it just, around you? How popular was it? That kind of thing.
I mean, when I was, around probably between the ages of like 15 and 20, I would say dance music it certainly wasn't the kind of like mainstream music. So that era for me, the music I'm talking about is, so like our main radio station, Radio 1, our UK top 40 charts, that was dominated by kind of indie bands or R&B or like some hip hop and stuff like that. And you'd have the odd UK garage or dance track, but it would be very commercial sounding. And it was actually like few and far between then. So it certainly wasn't like the music that was just there on the radio all the time. But it also was it felt like definitely like it wasn't so underground that you had to kind of seek it out. It was still like you'd still know like a fair amount of people who were into dance music. So It was definitely there as like an obvious option. But at the same time, it definitely wasn't like in the charts all the time and being that mainstream.
Were there, outside of, Fabric and clubs or raves you could kind of sneak into, were there other events that people were going to, or I'm just sort of throwing some random things out there, like, were there DJs in your class, kids who were trying to DJ, that kind of thing?
You know what? So I got into it through friends who were all predominantly male. And this was actually like my first access point was drum and bass. So that was the dance music.
Right.
That was my first step into it. And they were a little bit older. They were all guys. They were sort of using FL to make drum and bass at the time. And I guess there was like a small scene. There was some kind of like people would put on like free parties. Someone would have like find an empty house and like take a sound system in there. And there would be your token people who in the group who like knew how to DJ, which was quite a big deal. And I think at the time it was like 1,000. So everyone was on CDs. It wasn't as far back as vinyl, but yeah, everyone was on CDs. So yeah, there was kind of like that kind of underage culture of DIY kind of stuff going on in the area that I lived. And then I think people who were not really into the music would sort of dip in and out of that as well, because it was just kind of exciting as kids who like couldn't really go to clubs.
Right.
And then even in Kent, there were still clubs, even in my local town of Whitstable, which is where I cut my teeth actually as a DJ in the end. There was a group of promoters living in the town who they'd all sort of been at university in different cities, come back with like garage records, or they'd like gone and seen, because like I said, because the internet was just like not the same as it is now. They'd been kind of exposed to these other subgenres through like their universities in other cities, have come back to the town, then decide to put on events and bring DJs. The promoters in the town that I live in they were quite on the pulse actually for quite a small town. So they were bringing DJs, like they had Nero here before they popped off.
Okay.
Nero, Sigma, Flux Pavilion. They all had them in this little seaside town that I'm sat in right now, in like a 300 capacity venue on the beach.
Oh, that sounds great.
So yeah, I mean, so there was kind of like, there was like a little culture, even in Kent, which is probably, I guess, what you were saying is possibly more than what you guys maybe have over there in terms of it like reaching into every corner in some form of the country.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, then and now too, from, hearing you talk about when you started, it was making me think about when I started, which was, also a completely different time. And especially in dance music in the States, when I started, everything was underground. It was all, you really did have to go seek it out. It was not mainstream in any way. I mean, I'm a little older, so I'm talking about like the vinyl days and all that, but there's no better or worse. But I look at it now and it is a bit less of the regional thing that you're kind of talking about with sort of Kent becoming, or maybe even just Whitstable becoming sort of like this known area where it's like, yeah, it's a small town, but like there's really something going on there. It's kind of special. That, I don't know if that kind of thing exists as much anymore, because now we are all so connected. And so, someone in a small town can just see what's going on in the bigger town, and the culture is a little more fluid that way. I'm sure there's plenty of examples of cool regional scenes that I just don't know about. But
well, I think it was like, yeah, I think with here, like Whitstable was, I think being quite close proximity to London, it always helps. But like that was, I think, just an example of like many other towns in the country that also had that. Yeah. So it wasn't even really like Whitstable had a name for being like a cool place, like with that has cool dance acts. It was kind of like, I think I think going back to the original thing is like dance music here has always, even though it's not always been the main mainstream music, it's definitely like not so far off of that. There's always a scene in pretty much every town you go to.
Do you remember for you, was it a specific song or a performance or a mix, or maybe even a specific friend who was like playing you all this? Like, was there something that really, really got you passionate about it?
I mean, the first turning point for me was when a friend played me a track by High Contrast, a drum and bass producer, called Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And it's got like a soul sample in it. And that for me, I think I've always felt that even when I was like literally one of probably about 5 drum and bass girl DJs that I even knew of, even back then, like I think I always felt that the dance music that I mixed was very like feminine in a way, in terms of like it was very musical. I was always drawn to the real musical, soulful, lots of vocal tracks. And that was just something early on, because I always noticed as well, like when I first started DJing, I would have lots of females dancing and at the front, much more than my male peers would be able to do straight away. And I think that was just because of my natural selection. Yeah. So something like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, just to like that, like, because they were all, before they played that to me, this kind of group that I got on with, they were into Noisia, heavily into like Evil Intent. It was like really neuro heavy, like instrumental stuff, which I kind of like, I did like it. Like I liked the energy about it, but it didn't connect with my kind of natural identity. Right. And then following that, Chase and Status put out their first album called More Than a Lot. And again, there were some like real liquid tunes on there, like lots of vocal, musical stuff. And that was like, for me, when I was like, became like fully invested.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think it makes me think there must have been an evolution somewhere in there for you, because I was just listening to a bunch of your releases, and like even the new one, Story of Women and all that. A lot of those are a bit more underground, a little less vocal driven, some of them fairly like aggressive sounding tunes. Was that switch in your production kind of or not even a switch, but kind of an expansion of your sound. Was that a gradual thing? Was that an intentional thing? How did that happen?
Yeah, I think that was really gradual. I mean, like my journey as a DJ and producer is getting on to like 10 years now. So I've also spent years like DJing other genres. So like I actually like know who you are because I used to play some of your moombahton edits.
Oh wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
So yeah, so I kind of like I spent a really long time like mixing 110 stuff here in the UK, like moombahton, and I was like really into Mad Decent. I remember like Diplo put out a what was it called? It was a moombahton mix. I think it was like the first moombahton mix he did.
Right. I think I know what you're talking about.
I feel like it had like a butt on the cover. On like the artwork.
Almost certainly that era of Diplo, it almost definitely had a, yeah.
There's probably loads of them. I listened to that mix like every day for like a year.
What a crazy, can I ask you, sorry, just to interrupt you for 1 second, I'm sorry, but just because you mentioned it, that era, the moombahton era is like, it's very special to me because I was just in it. And I was watching it happen. And, you know, when you're there at the start of like a movement, and not even that I was a major part of it, but just being there, being around that energy is, you know, so exciting. And a thing that I feel like all of us only get a couple times when you really feel like you're there at the start of that kind of movement. What did you make of it in the UK? Because like, or even just being a little removed from it, because I feel like I was so in it that it just kind of naturally made sense to me. But now hearing you talk about it, I'm like, I must have seemed kind of crazy from the outside.
I mean, like, I probably have a very like unique view on it because just from my own personal thing, I was like, I love this music, moombahton. Like, no one had heard of it. Right. And I was like, this BPM is like for me. Like, I was mixing quite a lot of dancehall, some sort of old school hip hop, moombahton. And I was like, I kind of just decided that was like going to be my thing. And I was like at, you know, the Red Bull Carnival part, the mad Red Bull Major Lazer Carnival parties every year. And I was just like really trying to like push ahead with like being different because like basically no one was doing that here. I think there was like one party in London that was like a moombahton party. What was it called? I can't remember.
The only person I remember specifically doing a lot of it was Todd Latee at the time.
Yes. Yeah. So he was doing it. And then there was this party called like Hot Work. Do you know the Heat Wave from London? They were kind of like touching on it, but it wasn't like full. That was a lot of dancehall stuff as well and bashment, but people really enjoyed my sets because they were really different. It was also during a time when the 140 dubstep was really, really popping here. And I was like doing my thing. And again, like the girls loved it because it was that kind of like sexy BPM. And I was like so intent on like making it, doing this moombahton thing. And I just like found it like so hard to get booked here because the promoters just didn't really like get it. So when I did get booked, like the crowd were in it, and it definitely wasn't like I was clearing dance floors with this stuff. But I don't know if it was just a sign of the times when people really wanted to like box off genres. And I was like, I honestly didn't even know any other girl DJ in Kent at the time. I was like really different for being female already, and then being really, really different for playing this different kind of music. And I did always kind of think, oh, like maybe if like Mad Decent would notice me, like I could go and play a block party and I could finally play to a crowd that like knew this music. Yeah. And I pushed it like right to the end. And then I was just like, oh, I don't know if I can do this anymore because I just was like not getting good slots, like bookings were hard to get. And I was just like, am I going to reach my potential as a DJ here if I like really box myself off with this music? So in my mind, it was like massive, but I don't think it was like massive in this country at all.
Yeah. Well, and the same thing kind of happened here where like the hype was massive, right? Like the hype was just crazy on the internet. You'd think it was like the biggest thing of all time. But even in the States, I mean, it was popular, but it wasn't, it never got like a crazy movement. You know, it was just like,
it looked crazy though. The footage I saw of stuff, but like,
I mean, those parties
looked crazy. Yeah.
The energy in those parties can never be matched. Like some of those early moombahton parties, there's nothing like it. Yeah. I would love those things.
I would love to have been there. Like that must have been amazing because I just love that music.
Oh yeah, me too. And it was, but it also makes me want to ask you, I'd imagine you've had like, what would an equivalent experience be for you? Like I just saw, you're saying, I wished I had been there. I saw you played like the one of the last parties in Printworks, right?
Yeah. So
I saw you did that and I was like, man, I wish I could have been there. like that looked incredible to me. A, was that incredible? What did that feel like? And B, do any other, super kind of unique moments come to mind of the kind we're talking about?
Well, it's funny you should say that because I actually feel that is happening right now for drum and bass. There's significant things happening both here and in the US around drum and bass at the moment that I've always like I said, drum and bass was my first love and I never like fully stepped out of it. But I've always, even when I was off mixing other things and doing in other scenes, I always had one eye on drum and bass and I have witnessed its life cycle a few times round. Like every genre kind of comes to a forefront, goes underground, and that's kind of the cycle that most dance music genres go in. And I have to say, what is happening right now in drum and bass is not like anything like I've ever seen in terms of the kind of like, it just feels like something massive is about to happen. Like it's going to cross over and probably maybe not going to come back.
Wow. What is it? What kinds of things are going on over there? Because in the US, it's pretty easy to just point to the fact that like there's more drum and bass shows now, and like more people talking about it because it's never been that big here. But what is different in the UK? Like what feels different about it? Is it just the excitement level of it, the support for it?
I mean, the fundamental difference is that is the level of investment from major record labels, which is then converting into chart tunes. It's from that to commercial status musicians, or I guess you'd say like pop stars wanting to write on drum and bass. It's predominantly it's the kind of. It's like the majors are coming in for it. They're looking to invest. It's clear.
It's always a good sign.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the obvious thing. And then everything else kind of is like a trickle-down effect from that in terms of the fact that, I don't really know if... So Printworks, like you said, had 3 closing weekend dates. The Friday, Saturday, Sunday and Monday, I think. And I just don't even know if 6 years ago, drum and bass would have been included in that. But it pretty much was like the Sunday of that trio of events was a drum and bass event. And it was fully sold out. So it's kind of there was a long time where it was in the UK, it was just house music is the obvious giant and nothing will even ever come close. But there's this whole demographic now of student age, people here which is sort of 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are for them, this is their pop, R&B, indie music. Drum and bass is the thing when people are leaving school here that everyone in your class is going out and listening to drum and bass. And that's just crazy. That's
amazing, man. Yeah, it's so wild. I mean, it also makes me think about, not that I was around, but, in the 90s in the UK, to a certain extent, I feel mid to late 90s, didn't drum and bass have kind of a crazy wave like that, where it was almost like a pop celebrity culture for a second?
Yeah, definitely. Like around the time that sort of Ronnie Size was winning, you know, Mercury Music Awards, for sure. Like, I think if this kind of movement that's happening now was to kind of be compared to anything that has happened before, it would be that era for sure. But it's just like tenfold now just because of the internet. That's
exciting. Yeah. And so, I mean, shutting down Printworks there, I guess maybe for people who don't know, who are hearing this, like Printworks, legendary club in the UK that's, I mean, it's basically just an old converted factory, right?
Yeah, so it's originally like a printing factory, which is why it's called Printworks.
Right.
So it's like really industrial kind of settings. It's just very vast space as well.
Yeah, I mean, just visually, for anybody listening to this who doesn't know Printworks, just go like Google image search Printworks. It's a crazy, crazy looking space. I saw, I don't know if you know the DJ Bambi, but she played, I don't know if it was the closing weekend or one of the close, you know, to closing weekends there. And she was saying that it was one of those spaces for her that music sounded different, like it felt different to play music there than any other gig, really. Like, was it really that kind of special place? Because I never got to go to Printworks, but it always looked really incredibly unique to me.
Yeah, I think you could probably count maybe 3 venues in the whole country that have that kind of like effect. Printworks is definitely one of them. I'm probably guilty of like almost taking it for granted and until like the point when it's like taken away from you. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which a lot of people probably, I mean, everyone was falling over themselves to try and get a ticket for the final weekend. Because it's like, you know, you kind of wish you'd made more of it while it was still kind of there and available.
Of course. I mean, and that's just humanity, right? Like, that's how we do everything in life.
It was, yeah, I mean, it was just like, it's hard to explain. I mean, I think from like a practical point of view, the production in there, like the lighting, the sound system, it was all just like really well thought out, really well invested. The attention to the more important details, like the kind of immersive experiences and stuff. All of those details were like really heavily invested, and it was basically like if you were going to Printworks, like you were going for an experience. It was a daytime party as well. So it ran from midday till 10 p.m. So you like Amazing. Go in for this like whole daytime, like insane. And then in the summer you come out into London and it's like still daytime. It's just like crazy.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's another thing. That's another thing. Europe, especially the UK too, but that's one thing you guys do so much better than us is the sort of like 24-hour party. Like here, that's sort of unheard of. But, you know, you go out to whatever, Berlin, or, you know, you see the like 10 a.m. headline set kind of thing. And I've always been jealous of that, too, because, yeah, there's no crazier feeling than that. But let me bring it back to you for a minute, because, you know, we're sort of bouncing around in the timeline here. And I want to know for you, like, so you're an underage, club goer, and you get really into this culture, really into this sound. You have some friends who are, you know, making beats, DJing a little locally, that kind of thing. Was it an immediate thought for you that I want to do this? I want to be involved. I want to, you know, go beyond just sort of going to these shows?
Not at all. When I started raving, things were also very different then culturally. Like I feel like now everyone wants to be the person on stage mixing.
Yeah.
Whereas back then it was like, first of all, it was a lot harder to actually be able to physically DJ because you didn't have the same technology. So that you really had to want to do it. You had to invest a lot of time and energy to actually successfully be able to DJ, beat match. Using CDs was like a totally different ballgame. So like not everyone had like the perseverance. So a lot more of the crowd were just like happy to be there as fans and ravers. Whereas now I feel like most of the crowd are actually DJs themselves now, which is quite different.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You're right. Most of the crowd are DJs.
Most of the people that come up to me after my set who like want a photo, want to meet me, 90% of people will say to me, I'm a DJ. Like, I'm a DJ too. I'm learning to DJ, which is great. But it's also just like, I don't know if there's any just ravers left who are happy to just funny. Not want to also be the artist, which is on one hand is really cool because it's like clearly like everyone's inspired. There's now amazing access to be able to, if you want to, just like go out and do it. Whereas like the other thing is like the cost of the equipment back then, like you couldn't really get stuff like on finance the same way you can now. Controllers didn't really exist. Not most people, especially young people, didn't have like a few grand to throw at a set of CDJ. So that was probably part of it. But like in answer to your question, I was in the crowd. I was so happy to be there. Like if I got free entry because I knew one of the DJs, like sound, I never really cared about being backstage and meeting the other DJs or trying to like get my opportunity because I was just like, I'm just a fan of this music, you know?
Yeah.
So it happened like really organically for me. I never like was like, oh, I want to be a DJ.
Well, and you mentioned a few times, you know, sort of being the only female in the room in a lot of these early scenarios. Do you think that was part of it too? Like, did it feel not even necessarily in an aggressive or like overt way, but did it feel exclusionary to a certain extent of just like, this is what the guys do? You know what I mean?
That was never at the forefront of my mind, but now in hindsight, I think there probably was a subconscious feeling there of like, well, maybe I'm just like not technical enough, or like, you know, being technical and in that way is like maybe more of a guy's thing. So like, would I even be capable? So maybe like there was a subconscious thing of that there because there was nobody really like right there in front of me doing it to spark that kind of, I don't know, curiosity, I guess. But sure. I never felt gate kept out of it by anyone. Like,
well, that's good to hear.
You know, we'd put on these events in Whitstable. We'd go back to one of their houses. They'd all be smoking, like, you know, counting out the cash. Like, how did we do tonight? And just one night, I was just like, it's probably like 6 a.m. I was just like, can you show me just how to use the decks? I'm just quite interested. Like, just show me around the decks. And, you know, from the moment I did that, they were like super supportive and wanted to like show me how to do it and stuff. So it never felt like, oh, that's not for you.
Right.
So I guess I was I'm sure it's happened that way for other people because of, you know, like the ratio of it. But I was lucky that I was always kind of like, if anything, really encouraged to delve into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's good to hear because, you know, I never know those experiences, and especially drum and bass historically has a reputation of being kind of like the most guy heavy, exclusionary. Again, not necessarily intentionally, but that's just sort of the reputation it got over the years. And so that, I mean, that's good to hear. As far as like the technical side of, you know, whether it's technical mixing or production or any of that, how did you really start diving into that end of it?
So once I managed to sort of get my like after events little kind of tutorials in, then they started sort of giving me the warm-up set at these events. So on the DJ side of things, that was how that sort of started. You know, I never took any kind of like formal classes or anything like that. Like, I don't know if many people do or not, but they probably do nowadays, but
they
no
do.
one really did
they
that.
Definitely do now. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but like for me, like I'm kind of glad that I worked out my own way of doing it and just like wasn't really influenced by anything textbook, because I kind of don't know if that would have ruined my like creativity. Probably different for everyone, but like I kind of have my way of doing it, and I don't even know if that's like the way you're meant to do it or not on paper, but it just works for me. Do you know what I mean? And then I was at college, and I think I remember basically being like, so when you leave school here, you go to like a college from like the age of 16 to 18 before university. And I was sort of stuck with you have to pick a number of subjects, like 4 or something. And I was like stuck for one. And then I noticed music technology was on there. And like being the kind of like 17-year-old I was just like, oh, that will tick a box. Do you know what I mean? I definitely wasn't like, oh my God, I want to make music. This is going to be amazing. Like, I was like, okay, well, this will basically just like tick the box and I'll just like go and see what it's about kind of thing. And that's sort of like, then I met some other DJs, again, all guys, but like on the course. Because, you know, everyone in the music production course is also a DJ. Like that's standard, isn't it?
Yeah.
So sort of broadened my kind of like social circle in terms of like other DJs and stuff through that. You know, did do some sort of formal like tutor sort of sessions on, like at the time it was Cubase and Reason. This was going back years. And I was kind of into it, but I was also like, oh, I kind of just want to DJ because this is like the quick thrills for me. I think it was just like my age, just going out raving. I just about to turn 18. I could like go to all these clubs. I just wasn't really like that interested in sitting down and like learning the art of production. I was a bit impatient for it at the time. Kind of learned some foundation level stuff. But then like I basically kind of put production on the back burner for probably about 5 years and didn't really like touch it at all until I went back into it in like 2018. But I was just like really enjoying DJing and like the performance side of it and like, you know, the kind of live element.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely relate to what you're saying. My story is pretty similar as far as, you know, going to school for music and technology. And then, yeah, it was the same for me. DJing was always the number one. It was always what I was obsessed with. And then the production came much, much later in probably in a similar way. And for you, I mean, you know, around this time when you're in that course and you're DJing more and that sort of thing, were you looking at music as what you were going to do at this point? Like, how serious was music at this time in your life?
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't see it as a career option at all. I didn't know anyone who was actually making money DJing either, like money to live off. Because I just hadn't like worked myself into a place that I was that well connected where I like knew any headline DJs. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, I was I went to university and did a degree in public relations to like go and get a job, you know, in still wanted to work like, well, first of all, I went to London College of Fashion, did PR there. So it was always creative sort of industries for me, but I was never like, I never really set myself up to actually be the artist. I was always kind of like in training to be in like the business side because I thought, well, that's like the way that you can have like a kind of stable career. So again, you know, I sort of fell into doing it in the first place and then I fell into it actually being my career. Which
how did that happen? I mean, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, how did that happen? The falling into it, because I know at a certain point, like you linked up with Ministry of Sound, and I'm sure that was sort of a career explosion as far as, you know, how seriously you were taking it. But was that how? I guess the question is, how quickly did that happen from when you just started, you know, DJing more and more for fun?
I mean, I think, you know, from the beginning till now, everything has happened very gradually for me. Like, one thing I can say is I have never had, you know, that overnight moment that's like propelled me into this space. I'm kind of grateful for that because it feels like I've like laid really strong foundations. I'm very like wise to the decisions I'm making because I've never been thrown into anything that I haven't felt ready for. I mean, I've been DJing for probably about 3 or 4 years before I was kind of, I guess, scouted by Ministry of Sound. So I'd been doing it for a while already. At that point, I'd basically done the whole moombahton thing and then kind of had this epiphany that like, I really wanted to start playing house music. So, which I was like really enjoying, playing all different types of house for years. And then again, just because of the kind of like the type of house that was big here. I didn't really fit the mold. I was mixing on 3 CDJs, like really like cutting and chopping, quick mixing, almost like a garage DJ. Again, like, so I went from being this like bit of a considered a bit of a random weirdo playing moombahton here to like being a house DJ that like wasn't really a house DJ. And after 3 or 4 years, I was just like, do you know what? Like, I don't really know if I've got much like left to kind of try and feel like understood.
Right.
And I was kind of like, I don't know if I ever would have stopped, but I was like, right, I don't know if I'm going to do this anymore. And then literally the next day I had an email from the head of talent at Ministry of Sound asking me for a meeting because he'd come across one of my mixes on my SoundCloud, which had like 200 followers. Like there was like no activity on there whatsoever. I still don't know how he found it, but one thing I do know is that like I've always been a very creative DJ, and I think that helped. That's what stood out to him.
Right.
So I feel like I've always like have had this natural ear and skill for mixing. It was just that like no one could place me, and then that was a good turning point for me because they brought me on board as like to tour for them. So I started doing international shows, getting paid. You know, I had an agent for the first time. Like I'd never really known what a rider was until that point.
Sure.
But I mean, I still had a day job. So it wasn't like I started working for Ministry and I was like flying high, full-time musician.
yeah, of course. And for people who may, you know, people out in the States, anyone listening who's not as familiar, I mean, this sort of, I don't even know, would you call it like a residency with Ministry of Sound? I'm basically like the gig was essentially like Ministry of Sound throws parties all over, like different countries, that sort of thing. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is basically you know, were like one of the people who, when there would be a Ministry of Sound party, wherever, Croatia, you know, whatever it was, you would be one of the sort of Ministry of Sound residents that would go out to those parties.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it was. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And also for more context, I mean, it's a lot of work, right? Like a lot of parties all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, I found myself, you know, working 5 days a week. And then I was working 7 days a week because I would have to leave the office, you know, at lunchtime on the Friday. Luckily, I was working in a design agency at the time and they were like super forward thinking. I mean, this was going back a while, but, you know, it was like one of those kind of offices that are quite common now with like the pool table, and they were like super creative. So for me to be like, oh, like I need to leave early because I'm like flying to Austria to DJ, they were kind of like, cool, like go. Right. So I was quite lucky that I'd like, and then I'd get back on the Sunday night and then be at work on the Monday morning. And ultimately that went on for a while to the point where I was like, you know, I'm going to burn out if I carry on doing this. So I went and got a part-time job somewhere really corporate, still doing sort of marketing stuff in line with my degree. And then I was like I was working for this oil company 3 days a week, out gigging every weekend. And going in on a Monday morning was just soul destroying because it was just full of people that were just not like me. They didn't like music at all. Right. It was just like, and I ended up walking out because I was like I said, it was destroying my soul. And so it wasn't a logical decision. It wasn't rational. I just walked out of the office. I think I'd had a really great weekend of gigs, like felt on top of the world, went into this office on the Monday morning and my boss just said something to me. And I was just like, do you know what? Like, I'm off. And I just left. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm not going to be able to live off what I'm making as a DJ now. And luckily, like just throwing myself in the deep end, like from that point, like it's just worked out. So it wasn't like I ever like was really methodical, like, right, I'm going to go full-time music. Like it kind of just kept like happening that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's a scary moment, but I kind of like the idea that it was you almost threw yourself in the deep end. Like I'm sure quitting when your manager says a thing, like that's a sort of snap instant thing. But I don't know. I feel like there's something in the background that's like, no, like this will be good for us in the end, you know?
It's kind of like, you know, when you're in a situation where like you have to make it work because it not working like is no longer an option.
Right.
I think I put myself in that position like kind of on purpose.
Do you function well in like a high pressure kind of situation? Do you enjoy being, because some people really do, you know?
I think like I will always moan about the stress and the pressure of kind of putting myself in those situations, but somehow I always find myself thriving and like creating it so that I am in that situation. So as much as I'm like my own worst enemy, like I think it does bring out the best in me, being kind of just like gung-ho and kind of like taking risks. And
Absolutely. And did it, maybe this is a reach, but I mean, was there any aspect of that when you came back to drum and bass? Like leaving, you know, you tour around with Ministry of Sound, you're doing house and mixed format kinds of shows. Like, what was that? What was the return to drum and bass? How did that come about? And was there some, you know, high pressure or anxiety there, like kind of leaving this Ministry of Sound thing, which is reliable gigs, reliable money, it's sort of defined parameters, and striking off on your own again?
So again, it happened very organically, like where I had still continued to attend like Ram Records events and stuff like that. As like a kind of punter, I had gotten to know some people at the label and stuff like that. And I think I did like a one-off drum and bass set in Kent that a promoter I knew was putting on, and they were just like, "Oh, hey, Harriet, do you want to come and like warm up for?" I think it was Shy FX or someone, and play an all drum and bass set. And I was like, actually, like that sounds really fun. But I wasn't like, oh, this is my start. This is my road back into drum and bass. And the label manager at Ram happened to hear it on my SoundCloud, got in touch and was like, "This mix is really good. Like, have you considered like doing drum and bass again?" Called me in for a meeting. And he was like kind of saying, you know, "I think you're a great DJ. I know like how invested you are in drum and bass as a person. Like, I've got a Ram Records tattoo on my neck that I've had since I was 18. I was like, he was like, if you want to just like come jump both feet back into drum and bass, and like we're here to offer you a platform to do it, essentially." So this was in line with me having done ministry for a few years. I was finding myself like, yes, this is great. The brand is great, but I am not seen as like an artist. Quite often I'm having to compromise my sets to an extent to like really crowd please. And that was never who I was at heart. Like I've always been like, you know, a bit of a crate digger and like a music head, and found myself having to go more and more commercial the more and more it progressed, playing stuff that I didn't like truly like believe in. So I was like, well, yeah, I mean, going back into drum and bass and actually like working towards being like not Harriet Jaxxon, the Ministry of Sound DJ, but being like Harriet Jaxxon, the artist.
Right.
That came at a point where I was like really ready for that as well.
So how did that evolve? Because I would imagine that's around the same time you came back to producing.
Yeah. So once that happened, I think it was about a year later that I was like, right, I'm going to get back into the studio and like really like put some like heavy focus onto this. Now I kind of know exactly what I want to make as well. So, I mean, you know, I never really like signed to Ram. I guess they just kind of gave me a cosign in a sense. It wasn't like I was like, had a record deal with them, because at the time, like I didn't have any music. And that was never the idea either. It was like, we just think you're a really good drum and bass DJ and we're going to like put you on these events, support you as a DJ, which they did. I played like loads of like my first big festivals with like on the Ram stage, all these different club nights. So, and then consequently I met my first manager through that kind of platform. And he, you know, is heavily in drum and bass as a manager. So I think when you get to that point, it's kind of like things do start to kind of snowball a little bit then when you've kind of almost got a team around you. I like joined like a proper agency. Started getting booked like for other drum and bass events. Started making music. But then, I mean, I didn't even put my first bit of music out until 2 years after this point. So I went for about 2 years as like having no back catalogue of music, but just like climbing as a DJ, climbing the ranks as a DJ, like getting recognition just purely as a DJ, which I think is quite rare, really.
Yeah, especially these days, it's really rare. I'm glad you said that, because it's something I wanted to make a point of too, is that, you know, you're not that I have seen you live, but I mean, I've seen videos of you playing, and it's, yeah, you're doing technical mixing. I mean, we were sort of talking about how the barrier for entry for DJing is maybe a lot lower than it used to be, but that doesn't mean that there aren't, you know, levels and levels of skill you can put on top of that. And, you know, I think it's worth saying that, yeah, you're DJing on a different level than a lot of DJs.
I do feel confident in my ability as a DJ. I've been doing it for quite a long time. I think going through the experiences I have, and especially mixing other genres, touring for someone like Ministry of Sound, where you have to think on your feet super quick. Like, I think all of that has just like played into just this kind of natural kind of, I guess, creative process as a DJ, or like technical blueprint that I use. People have like always compared me to Andy C. And I mean, he's definitely one of my biggest sort of inspirations, but I think it's just about having an understanding of how to essentially manipulate energy in a crowd. So I've like never sort of watched Andy and really been like, oh, like all the tracks he plays, all the tracks I want to play, because they're really not at all. It's just like, I've always really respected him as a DJ just for his ability to understand like the flow of energy, and like no matter what technical way you do that or what selection you kind of go for in order to do that, because mine and his are actually quite different, but it's kind of like the whole working towards that being the goal, I guess. And I think after all this time, I've like have got to a point where that does come quite naturally now. And I think that's how I was managed to kind of get to places without any music.
Right.
But there is undoubtedly like a ceiling when you're doing that.
Oh, of course. but it is still, it's interesting to talk about, because I think it's a more rare path. Did you ever, because obviously like you know Andy C, you play gigs with him, you've done stuff with Ram. Have you ever talked to him about this kind of thing? Because obviously he's known as like one of the top DJs just in existence as far as technical skill, as far as reading the crowd, energy, all that stuff you were talking about. You know, he has like the instincts for it. Have you two ever talked about that sort of very weird specific science?
Kind of. I wouldn't say we've ever really got into it. And that's probably because even though, you know, at one time I would see Andy like every weekend. We actually shared a manager for a long time. So we were like very much like around each other a lot, but like I'd be lying if I didn't say I still feel a bit starstruck by him.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So like, it's weird, isn't it? Because like, you know, we kind of like, yeah, we do. We'll see each other and like be like, how's the family? And it's like kind of, we know each other like that, but I still am like the girl in the crowd who's like, oh my God, it's Andy C.
you're the DJ in the crowd. Yeah. The whole crowd is DJs and you're one of them. Yeah. But no, I totally get that. And it's also, you know, when you're seeing somebody at a gig or a festival and you talk to them for 15 minutes, you know, there's never any... It's one of those weird things, because we're all sort of running around. We're all doing the same thing, but it also can feel, I think, a little disconnected and a little, even though you're always around people, you still can feel kind of alone doing it.
I feel like there's a lot of like unintentional, like repeated conversations with the same people. And it's kind of like, I think what's really nice is when you end up doing kind of abroad festivals, and there's no, because in the UK, like everyone is in and out. They've got somewhere else to be. it's a high and a buy. And as nice as that can be to see familiar faces, like, you're right, like you're not, it's not like you're sitting down and like having a drink with one of your friends. But when you actually go and do these like abroad festivals, because you're like all in a different country, nobody can just leave to go to another show theoretically. That's when you really get to know people. And that's really nice. Because that is when you end up talking about, you know, everything and the job and the industry and really like getting to know like your peers, I guess.
Yeah, which in a way, I mean, it's such a small world in what we do. The longer I do this, it's kind of it's probably part of why I do this podcast too. Like, it's kind of one of the only things I think is actually important anymore, is like actually getting to know these people. And the only thing I remember for the most part is like, it's not the crazy show I played, but it's kind of who I was with when that happened, you know? I don't know. What we do is just such a weird thing, and it does feel like a bit of a fellowship, and I think I'm enjoying that more and more kind of the longer I do it.
Yeah, I hear that.
So there's a couple things. I don't know if I'm going to make smooth transitions with all of this, but I want to make sure I talk about a couple things. I wanted to make sure we talked about The Story of Women, which is your new track that I really love, and I wanted to ask you, just in general, like it was a different sound from other things that I've heard you release. It's also a different sound from just a lot of what's going on in drum and bass right now. And I love the track. It's one of those simple things where, like, to me, the core idea of the song is a simple idea, but it's an idea that just no one had done yet. And to me, those are kind of like the best ideas for songs. It's just like that thing that was there, it was in front of everybody, but you're just the one who did it at this time. And I don't know. I really like the tune. I don't know if I even really have a question, but I guess what's the story of that song for you? How did it come about?
I mean, I'm curious to know what do you see as like the idea when you talk about the idea behind it? Like what is
sure,
that?
Yeah.
An outsider's perspective.
Yeah, totally. So I'm mainly talking about sort of the musical or cultural idea of it, where to me it's like taking these rave sounds, like these old school rave sounds, which, you know, that a lot of people are like interested and excited about these old school rave sounds right now. Combining that with acid, which is, you know, another sort of older like sound culture that I think people are exploring more again. But then putting those together in the context of drum and bass, like it's just kind of that specific cocktail of it that felt really unique to me, where it's like, oh yeah, all these things that people really like and are kind of like in the ether right now, but I just never heard someone put it together that way. And it worked for me. I like the sound.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, the seed was planted with that when I was in lockdown. And I was watching like a feature film sort of documentary about women in electronic music. Laurie Anderson, people like that. And so we're going back to like the 50s and 60s here. The first female, not like, the first female DJs. We're talking about like the first women who were like building synthesizers and things like that.
Pauline Oliveros, all of those. Like there's a lot I don't know if people know that, but yeah, there's a lot of women in early electronic music, like back when it was pretty much just an experiment, you know?
They're basically like scientists. Do you know what I mean? It's not
100%.
So basically I watched this film and I was just like really encapsulated by it. I thought it was amazing. And there was a spoken bit in it that just like stuck with me. And I remember getting my phone out and rewinding it and recording it. And I was like, one day, like I have to build a track around this phrase. And I was like, I'm not going to put any pressure on myself to be like, right, like let's make a track and like just throw it in. Like I didn't actually go in with this sample essentially for like a couple of years until after I'd sort of saved it. And I think like the musicality just came around the fact that a lot of this documentary was sort of set in the 70s. There was this kind of like element of like psychedelic aspect to it to me, this kind of like almost like matrix-y, like white noise and bleep kind of set. Like it was just the whole vibe of the film. So I think with that came the kind of like the acid reference. Like I said, there's nothing strategic about the vibe. It would just felt very natural to me. I'm just like, I've never been about being influenced what's like big at the time in a scene. So I knew that this was quite different to what's, I guess, at the forefront of maybe drum and bass at the moment. But I never really paid attention to that myself. If anything, I to like try and move out of that kind of space when something feels like it's like really happening. It's a natural tendency for me to kind of think, like get distracted by something else and then kind of go that way.
Right.
And I don't know, like there's probably pros and cons to that, but it's just, I think you just have to, when you're making music, like you can't have like a strategy. That's just like never going to work. And then, you know, the kind of visual aspects of it, which people have been commenting a lot about, the kind of attention that the track had on radio and stuff, like people talking about the video that I had done. And that's really cool as well, because I've always kind of preached about how I really enjoy like the 360 aesthetic of music, like the visual element. Like for me, like that's just as exciting, building a campaign with visual assets as making the track itself. In fact, when I'm making the track, I'm like already thinking about what that's all going to look like.
Right.
So yeah, and I just think it was just girl power at the end of the day. And it wasn't in like the modern form. It was actually these women who looked really nerdy, like doing really like scientific things. They weren't like trying to be like sassy about it, right. But it was just like super cool because they were just doing this mad stuff. And back then, like they really were the only women like ever in the existence of time to be stepping in. Stuff, like.
Yeah, well,
and glad that like more people don't really know their names. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I mean isn't that the way it always goes? Is that, you know, the originators never get their due, and you know it's always it's kind of one of those tragic like just human experience things. But what I liked about what you were saying is that sure, like they, you know, you watch that documentary, you see them, and they don't immediately strike you as like, you know, these are the cool people doing cool things, but what they were doing, that's actually cool, right? Like that's so much cooler than most of what we're shown that we're supposed to say is cool. And maybe this is too much of a reach, but I like the idea that the track you made, it's almost like re-soundtracking that documentary. Like you were talking about, you know, it was 70s and had this sort of psychedelic feel to it. I kind of like the idea that, you know, you recognize their coolness and you're like, well, let's give them the appropriate soundtrack for, you know, these days. Like, let's just update this, recontextualize it. Not that this was necessarily all your intention, but it's I don't know. It's a fun thing to think about that, like, you can get inspired by something and then actually make something that brings that inspiration back into current day. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's like into kind of like, you know, I filmed the video in Bristol, which feels like a very like core like place for, you know, the origin of like this kind of music. And it's like there's loads of girls starting. I mean, all the girls in the video are all DJs. But like, I didn't do that on purpose. I literally was it was all very DIY. And I think that kind of comes across, but I think that's also part of the appeal for me. Like there was no budget, there was no resources. We just basically went to a car park with like one camera guy and like a Bluetooth speaker and just all kind of like came in our own clothes. Do you know what I mean?
That's great. That sounds
but it kind of
fun.
all just like, it's just very like grassroots. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing like. So,
I mean, hearing you say that takes me back to when you were talking about, you know, you and your friends early on, just at somebody's house after the show or whatever, you know, that's the same thing. And when is it more fun than that? Like there's nothing better than, you know, those memories, like the feeling you had at
like
that
no
time.
ego involved and either is there from anyone. It's just like, just vibes.
Yeah. And I think
there's no like business side. It's just, you're right.
And I think the closer you can stick to that when you get into like a professional setting, the better it's going to be for you, the more fun you'll have, and probably the better shit you'll make,
Definitely. I definitely think as well that keeping that will keep you in touch with your own identity. And only by doing that are you going to make stuff that's unique.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I guess as we're kind of wrapping it up, it makes me want to ask for you, do you feel like you've settled in a place as far as you as a performer, you as an artist? Maybe settled is the wrong word, but, do you feel like you've sort of found that identity that you've been on a path towards, or is it still an evolving thing? Are there still, crazy ideas you have that haven't happened yet?
Oh, for sure. Like my idea of my identity is like going to just be a metamorphosis, like, and I'm a piece of that. Like, I think I thrive off like projects and moments and like different identities, and really like that is my identity. Like this project and this identity that I'm in right now is like probably not going to, I'm going to want to move on to something else like at some point, but it's going to be equally as authentic. Like I enjoy reinvention, but I think what's different for me personally now than maybe in the past is having the confidence to do it. Because it does take a lot of confidence to be able to be like this is who I am today and I'm owning it and like I believe in it, and people might hate it, but like this is who I am. And then like, and then after a certain amount of time being like, no, actually this is who I am. Right. Like, do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm like fully here for it. But it's like, I think it takes experience and confidence, which you have to grow to. And I think I'm in that place now, which like feels really good for sure.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I mean, there's so much more we could talk about, but, I'll save some of it for the next round somewhere down the line. But, is there anything else that's on your mind? Anything else you want to get out there? Anything else I didn't ask but should have before we get out of here?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel like we've covered kind of past, present and future. And it's actually been really nice because I feel like I like doing stuff like this because it's very cathartic, and it's like sometimes when I speak to people who like ask interesting questions, it makes me like learn more about myself.
Sure.
But I mean, I hope like you got something from it as well.
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm loving this. Yeah, I could keep talking to you for a long time here. This is super fun. But, it's late there. I don't want to keep you all night. So we'll
I'm on
come
5% battery. So I've just realized my All
right. Well,
it's a natural end.
Yeah, this is perfect. I have a final question. It's a short question. It's the same thing I ask at the end of each one of these interviews, and then we'll get out of here. Just looking for a moment from your life, a memory from your life. Could be from any time, could be from when you were a kid, could be from last week. Doesn't matter. When in that moment, in that memory, music really hit you hard in that moment, really meant something to you, had a deep impact on you. And that could be something as simple as the right song played while you were out on a nice sunny day and it was a nice memory, or, you saw a concert that left an impression on you, or you were with people you loved and some song played and everybody laughed, whatever it was, just the first thing that pops into your head.
So the first thing that pops into my head is there was one time when I came home from school and let myself into my parents' house at the time. And my dad had like an iPod Classic. And I remember because he had a mad vinyl collection. He's like a proper music head. He plays loads of instruments, but he moved all his vinyl onto this iPad Classic like years and years ago. And he had like a good like sound system at home. And I was like, discovered some like drum and bass on there. This was like way before, but I played this track by Ronnie Size called Sound Advice. And there's like this amazing harp at the beginning. And then it like drops with the drums, with drum and bass. And like, I still remember that moment thinking like, oh my God, like what is this? Like, so that's like the first thing that comes to my head.
That's beautiful. No, I love that moment because that's such a DJ moment. It's like when the drop comes in and the crowd goes like, it's like that moment of surprise and just like heightened feeling that, music could even do that. It's like a mind expansion kind of thing. And that's to me,
great.
Yeah, that's the core of everything we do, right? I love that. That's great. Well, that's it. We don't need to do any more than that. Thank you for doing this. I really enjoyed talking with you.
No, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome.
Right, I'm going to run because I'm on 5% and I don't want it to just cut out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let you go. Have a great night. Thanks again. It's so nice to talk to you.
And you. Speak soon.
All
Bye.
Right, bye.